Hi, welcome to the Social Justice and Introduction PowerPoint for student employees of the Division of Student Affairs. This training is designed to introduce student employees to topics of social justice and how it relates to your position here at JMU. During this training, we'll predominantly going over content and concepts that will be important for you to know as we relate this back to your position. Throughout this video, there will also be opportunities for self-reflection and note-taking. You should have received a document that lists out the reflection questions, but you are free to complete them in a different format if you prefer. Your supervisor may ask to see these completed questions, so make sure they're in an accessible format and bring them to your on-campus training. So before we get into the content, we are going to introduce ourselves. So my name is Jess Weed and I use she, her pronouns. I work in student activities and involvement with all of our recognized student organizations. Also important, I identify as a white cisgender woman from a low-income family, and I also identify as a first-generation college graduate.
And my name is Jennifer Iworks. I use she, her, and hers pronouns, and I am the Assistant Director for SJI Education and Support here at JMU. Also, to give you a little bit more context about myself, I identify as a white cisgender woman. I'm middle class and a college graduate. I'm bisexual and I am temporarily able-bodied. You can also see both my contact information and Jess's contact information on the screen. So if you have any follow-up questions or things you want to cover with us, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to be resources for you here on campus. So before we jump into the content of this training, we want to explain the reasoning behind it. Many people call JMU the Disney World of colleges because they believe it is a beautiful and wonderful place where everyone is happy and has the best time. The truth is, we know that's not the case for everyone. Everyone does not have the happiest and safest experience here at JMU. And we believe it's a part of our jobs, of everyone's jobs here at JMU, to make this campus a better place. As student employees, we think this is a part of your job too. You will be interacting with peers, visitors, other employees, and loved ones of students with your positions. And we want to help you make these positive impacts with others. During this training, we ask you keep an open mind and ask honest questions, and we're going to do the same. To help you understand what we will be covering in this training, here are the training outcomes. As a result of participating in the Student Affairs, Student Employee, Social Justice and Inclusion training, student employees will be able to do the following. Define the following terms within the context of SJI: social justice, social identity, personal identity, power, oppression, agent, and target. List the expectations for SJI in their department. Explain how their lived experiences influence how they conduct their role. Identify at least 3 ways social justice and inclusion impacts their role on campus. And finally, implement at least 1 inclusive practice in their role. So I know that's a long list, but as you might already know, this training is going to take place in 2 parts. Part 1 is this video that you're currently watching. We will talk about definitions, important concepts, and give you reflection prompts to journal on through this video. Part 2 will take place later, and it will be facilitated by your supervisor or supervisors. This conversation will be with others that are in a similar role or area to you, and will help you see how the general topics we're going to cover today apply to your specific role on campus. Since you will be in that space with peers and with your supervisor, that's a really great place for questions specific to your own work. So feel free to take notes or questions that you are prepared to bring to that next part of the training if you like. And finally, if you want to know more about what we're going to cover in this video, here's a quick overview. As we've mentioned, there's going to be some self-reflection throughout the time together. We've already talked a little bit about why we're here. We'll go over definitions and concepts that we talked about in the outcomes. We're going to discuss how you can engage in inclusive practices. We're going to give you some campus resources, and we'll have some assessment at the end. So to start us off, we have a few questions for you to reflect on. For each of these slides, go ahead and pause this video so that you can take notes on your thoughts on the handout that you've been provided, or however you'd like to take notes. So our first questions are related to what you have heard about SJI. So what have you heard about social justice and inclusion during your time on campus? And what have you heard in the news? Go ahead and pause this video now to reflect on those two questions. The next set of questions are about your expectations. So what overall expectations and responsibilities do you remember that you will have in your role? How often do you expect social justice and inclusion and related topics to come up in your role or position? And in what ways? Go ahead and pause this video to reflect on these questions.
Thanks for taking the time to reflect. Feel free to return and add notes throughout this training for those questions or anything else that comes up. Now we're going to jump into some content. We are the first to admit that what we're talking about today would be considered a very big topic. There's a lot of moving parts to social justice, and we're only going to scratch the surface today. Take notes of questions that come up or that need more explaining. Before we can discuss these big topics, though, it's important that we have a shared language. So we're actually going to start with some definitions that are important in this work. We're going to start with identities, specifically personal and social. A personal identity is something you choose based on your beliefs, values, choices, and interests. These are self-described, so you are the one choosing the identity. No one else chooses this for you. And there are not in-group or out-group impacts on a large societal scale to these identities, nor as they are associated with aspects of privilege or oppression. We'll be defining these other concepts soon. Personal identities can look and sound like I'm a Leo, or I'm from Nova, or I hate buffalo mash. While these aspects may be important to an individual, you are able to opt in and out of these identities at will and when you want to. You may not be able to change your birthday, for example, but you can decide whether you ascribe to astrological sign theories. In contrast, a social identity is based on a physical, social, or mental characteristics such as race, gender, sexual orientation, and ability. These aspects, while self-claimed, are not necessarily chosen by the individual. Others tend to ascribe these identities before an individual can claim them for themselves. For example, you may mentally assign a race to an individual walking down the street based solely on their skin color and appearance. This may or may not match with the race that they identify with. Social identities are associated with in-group and out-groups, privilege and oppression, with there being power dynamics between the two groups. Again, we're going to go over those topics in just a bit. So for now, we want you to consider some of your own personal and social identities. Take a moment to pause this video over the next 2 slides and consider where you identify. Are there any identities that you hadn't thought about before? Are there any that you're hyper aware of? We also want to acknowledge that these identities and their privilege and oppressions are based in the United States context. These can vary based on a global location. Thank you again for that reflection. Now, when we consider diversity, our hometowns, majors, or anything that makes something different is what normally comes to mind. For us in our content today and going forward, we want to make a distinction between diversity and difference. The comparison on the screen is the widely accepted academic distinction that is used across numerous disciplines. Acknowledging this allows us to have an open and honest conversation about diversity and critically examine the spaces we are in. Once diversity is tied to social identities, we can truly talk about privilege and diversifying our spaces. Of course, differences in personal identities are important. They are what make us unique, but they aren't what make us diverse and can be informed by social identities, but again, do not contribute to diversity. The social spaces that we exist in have constructed diversity to mean something that is palatable to the majority, allowing them to never critically consider their role in society. So we ask you to consider this definition of diversity. not difference. So why is this important? Why should we care about this? Social identities are the contributing factor to diversity on campus. However, the presence of structural diversity, such as having people of color, varying sexual orientations, and nationalities, does not automatically make a campus welcome for all. We need to be able to see, understand, and talk about our experiences. Change is made by confronting the issues we are experiencing, so we need to be able to talk about them. Why is this important to your role? Yes, this is important to your role. As a student employee at JMU, you are a student leader, a campus expert, and an authority figure in many instances. To your role, you bring your personal and social identities and your experiences with others of differing social identities. Essentially, how you treat others and how others treat you impact your role. We believe it is impossible to leave your past at the door. Coming to work as your authentic self means bringing those past experiences. So take a moment to pause this video and reflect. What do you think this means for your role? Why is understanding identities and diversity important?
Now we're going to cover terms and concepts relating to power, oppression, and their impacts. There are many forms of power, but today we're going to look more in depth at 3 types: institutional, positional, and social power. Even though there are different types, you should know that all power is relational, meaning it is based on how 2 things relate or interact. Institutional power is the power yielded by entities such as governments, churches, and corporations, or educational institutions like JMU to control people and direct their behavior using rewards and punishments. Institutional power exists where authority has been approved by a society and it's accepted as legitimate. So some examples of what institutional power can look like are policies and procedures that an institution implements. So again, these are ways that an institution will reward behavior or punish behavior. So that could be embedded in policies. This could be political advocacy, or it could look like fines or account holds if folks aren't doing what an institution wants. Can you think of any other examples of institutional power that you have seen or experienced? Positional power is the next type of power we're going to talk about. And positional power is the authority that you as an individual wield by virtue of your position in the organization's structure or hierarchy. So this can look like, as an individual, using your power to enforce a specific policy. It can also look like providing resource referrals based on the power that you have, or providing access to opportunities and support to people based on the position that you have. So again, can you think of other examples of positional power that maybe you have seen or experienced? The last part of power we're going to talk about today is social power. And social power is access to resources that enhance one's chances of getting what one needs or influencing others in order to lead a safe, productive, and fulfilling life. So some examples of what social power look like, and again, these can be on a more individual level. So this is an adequate grasp of language or social cues. So you can see how being able to speak the most common language, for example, in the United States, being able to fluently speak English gives someone a lot of power in social situations because it makes it easier for them to communicate with folks. Having access to formal schooling, because formal schooling helps people to understand different social skills and categorizations that we learn, right? We learn that through schooling, and then you can apply that to other places in life. Or this can look like just meeting conventional standards of behavior, like conventional ways of dressing or things like that in public. So again, for the last time, can you think of some other examples of social power and what that might look like? So power itself can be used positively or negatively, right? So some of the things that we even mentioned, like providing referrals to people, giving people access to resources, can be done in a really positive way, but power can also be used in a negative way. So when we see power wielded negatively, it can lead to oppression of a social group or social identity. So oppression is the systemic or planned subjugation or control of one social group by a more powerful social group. So this happens to give more power, this happens to give the more powerful social group some social, economic, social, or political benefit. And there are 4 conditions that we usually associate with oppression, which are the following. So the oppressor or the agent group has the power to define reality for themselves and for others. So in essence, the oppressor group gets to decide what is good or bad, what is right or wrong, what is desirable or undesirable in this reality. That can lead to the target groups taking in and internalizing negative messages about themselves, and they can end up cooperating with the oppressors, so thinking or acting like them. As a result of oppressive systems, genocide, harassment, and discrimination become systematic and institutionalized, so that individuals are not necessary to keep them going. And members of both the oppressor and the target groups are socialized to play their roles as normal and correct. So this can mean that neither of those groups are pushing for change because they just believe that the way things are how they're supposed to be or that they should be. Another concept that comes from wielding power is privilege. Privilege is unearned social power given by the formal and informal institutions of society to all members of a dominant group at the expense of the targeted groups. And privilege isn't something that you can turn off or on, or that is impacted by your individual circumstances. Since it's given by a formal and informal institutions in society, there isn't a choice there. The only thing that changes who has a privilege is changing the institutions themselves. As you can see from the definitions of oppression and privilege, these aren't experiences or concepts that impact everyone the same way, and they aren't necessarily good things. In order to create a world where these experiences aren't impacting people negatively, there's a concept called social justice. The goal of social justice is the full and equal participation of all groups in a society that is mutually shaped by their needs, a vision of society in which the distribution of resources is equitable and all members are physically and psychologically safe and secure. Individuals are both self-determining, which means they're able to develop to their full capacities, and interdependent, which means being capable of interacting democratically with each other. And that actors who have a sense of their own agency as well as a sense of social responsibility toward and with others and society as a whole. The process for obtaining the goal of social justice includes democratic and participatory spaces, inclusive and affirming of human agency and capacities, a power with rather than a power over paradigm, and a clear way to define and analyze oppression. So how does all of this impact you? As a student employee, you hold power in your position. Often you'll be seen as an authority figure, someone in charge, or someone who needs to set an example. And this can happen regardless of the kind of position you have, Just by being an employee at JMU, again, you hold some power over peers, over guests. You're considered an insider here at JMU. Also, it's important to know that we don't show up to work as a blank slate. We bring our experiences, our feelings, our positivities, and our negatives into this space. And this is a part of being authentic. So we bring our social identities, we bring our personal identities, we bring all of this with us, and it's naturally going to impact the work that we do. We ask that you recognize that you're impacted by all of the experiences you bring in your social identities, because that's the first step to creating a socially just world and promoting a socially just experience through inclusion. This might be a really good place to pause and think about the 3 types of power, think about oppression, think about privilege, and think about social justice. What questions do you have on these topics? Now would be a great time to write down some of those questions, and you can bring them to the part 2 of your training.
So we mentioned inclusion as one of the first steps to creating a socially just world. But what is inclusion? We've been leading up to this concept to hopefully give you background information and definitions so it makes the most sense. Inclusion is the practice and/or policy of providing equitable access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. Inclusion is necessary for your job and assigned duties. As if someone feels excluded from the space you oversee or the programming you're running, or feels unwelcome talking to you, you cannot properly do your job, and that affects campus culture. Inclusion is not difficult, and you probably already are intentionally including folks in various efforts. So let's consider this scenario. You're asked to give a walking tour of the building you work in to some prospective students and their families. You notice one individual is on crutches, one family that seems international with English as their second language, and a prospective student that has ze/zer as their name tag with their pronouns. Those are their pronouns on their name tag. Pause this video and do a quick reflection. What expectations do you know of that your current position lists for this scenario? How do you go about giving this tour? What do you say? What do you do? What do you not say? Or what do you not do? Pause this video and reflect and think about this for a moment. So what inclusive strategies did you list to include all of the folks that are on the tour? Introducing yourself with your pronouns and respecting others' pronouns is a more and more common inclusive strategy that you may have already seen around campus. You'll notice Jen and I introduce ourselves with our pronouns. If you have questions about someone's pronouns, make a mental note to look up those pronouns in meetings when you have a moment. Other inclusive strategies can ensure the pathway is ADA accessible and asking what assistance an individual may need. Avoid asking specifics, such as, do you want a wheelchair? And ask broader questions such as, we won't be going up and down any stairs on this tour, but what else can I do for you on the tour? Try not to assume someone's ability or comfort. So ask the broad question to indicate that you are aware they might need accessibility help and are open to that assistance as necessary. The same strategy can apply to the international family. Don't assume they don't know English, need a translator, or need other accommodations. In part 2, you'll discuss with your supervisor more specific inclusion strategies for your role and the expectations regarding inclusion within the department. As we start to wrap up this portion of the training, we want to remind folks the goal we have for the division and for our employees. We want everyone to feel valued and able to explore campus to achieve their potential. As a division, we're consistently working towards this goal with continuing education and opportunities to engage in these topics. Consider this short list of campus resources for continued education and opportunities to ask questions. These offices and individuals host multiple programming opportunities throughout the year so that you can engage in diversity topics and continue your own education. During your training on campus, your supervisor will be facilitating a conversation that more directly relates these concepts to the realm of your position, including scenarios to discuss. Remember, they may ask to view your completed reflection sheets from this training, so be sure to bring it in an accessible format for them. Lastly, you will receive an email in the following weeks for a survey asking about your experiences with and feedback concerning this training. We promise we're going to keep it short, so we hope you'll be able to complete it so we can continue improving this training in the future years. You can also email either one of us directly if you have questions. Remember, our emails are at the front of this video. So thank you for taking the time with us today. We look forward to seeing you on campus, and go Dukes.